Okay. So, the whole point of this is like a profile on you. First of all, I looked at you and I did a paper on you as like
So
I
weird.
did a whole paper on you.
That's so weird. Okay.
As like your presence on Facebook. And basically the point but my paper ended up being you as an influencer
Okay.
at your
Okay.
community. Okay. So
Yeah.
now so I really just zeroed in on like you're very community minded, you're very
Hmm.
active in the community. You're very like you are very active. And so my profile is about you in your influence
Okay.
and how you are in Pottstown. And so that's what this is
Okay.
mainly about. So it was really fun
It's
writing
really
about
interesting. Okay.
it. I should have brought it for you to read.
I believe that's the first time I've been referred to as any kind of influencer. That's funny.
So my first
You should
question,
send it to me to read because
I
I would
will. I'll
like
bring
to
it. I'll
read
bring it
that.
next Tuesday for you to read.
I'm going to be totally weirded out.
You will because like it was glowing.
Okay.
So first, can you tell me about your like feelings about Pottstown, about the community, and
My feelings about pasta. So obviously, I grew up here.
mm-hmm.
I grew up literally in this house, and with no connection to the town whatsoever. Well, maybe I shouldn't say whatsoever, but pretty nearly. Like school was like a private Christian school, school and church for my life, and there wasn't much connection to like where we lived, and there really wasn't connection with even our neighbors. I mean, there was like a few like friendly conversations here and there, but there was just not a sense of being a part of the community. And so over time, and especially once we decided to buy the house and we like chose to live here, like there's this phrase that I forget exactly who came up with, but I picked Pottstown, and it's like kind of the idea is promoting Pottstown, and we choose to live here, and it's like one of those things where, as much as it's a catchphrase, there was an element for us of like, no, we're choosing to be here. Like there's some level even back when we bought the house that I was aware of people being like, oh, Pottstown, like sorry, you're gonna send your kids to the school district, and so there was this negativity, and we kind of dug in a little bit, like yeah, we're choosing to be here, like this is, and it wasn't for any huge reason. It was just this is where we are, so let's choose it. Like there's no reason to go anywhere else. So I don't know, over time it felt like it just developed into like getting connected to the community, especially once our kids were school age. And it just started to feel more and more like understanding what community is in that like geographical, not just geographical though, but like the element of being in a town, being a part of what is an established community. Whereas before I had community in like church or school or like in certain smaller groups, but like not just smaller, but like where you have community at church because you're like-minded about something. And with being a part of a community in a town, it's like it's more about because we are part of this place. It's a different way of experiencing community. So, that just it snowballed. So now it feels very much like when I think about what do I feel about Pottstown, like a million things I feel about Pottstown. And part of it is that over time with the advocacy and with taking up kind of a cause that is oriented, well, not totally oriented around our town, but it's definitely focused on our town, but it's also bigger. It gives me even more of a sense of like ownership. Like there's an element of like I don't know. I think love is probably the first word. It's like, but it's not just love because oh, I love, it's perfect. Like it's not love like it's family love. It's or it's like committed love. It's not like the love of like this is just fun, and it's not first date love of like oh my gosh this is the best thing ever. It's more like know the place and its challenges, and but I am all the more glad to have chosen it. So I don't know.
that's good. Well, this kind of hits on what you already said. Is it, I had when and how did you start getting seriously involved in the community?
Yeah,
And what the
the
motivations
school. So, and like to kind of circle back to that, people were like, "Are you gonna send your kids to Pottstown? You're gonna send your kids to Pottstown?" And I was like, "Yeah, we are." And so, and then once we were in the elementary school, people were like, "Are you gonna send your kids to middle school?" Like, because the middle school is like many communities, the middle school is often one of the more challenging places. And certainly, it is something that there's a lot of folks who will live in Pottstown, and as their kids get into the schools or are approaching middle school, they leave for better schools. Like this is oh man, the number of people I know who have left for sometimes they'll send their kids to charter schools. Sometimes they'll just move because they want to be in, Boyertown or Owen J. Roberts or some other, wealthier school that they perceive as being better. And you can get in. Are you really surprised?
I mean, I didn't realize there was an exodus.
Yeah, well, and it's just like I've seen it. I see it especially among white middle class families. Um, it's not only that for sure, but it definitely is. There's a sense of like for a lot of people, there's a sense of if they perceive the school district as deficient, and so I want better opportunities for my kids. So people will they'll leave, and it's a steady thing. It's not an exodus like it's more every year. It's steady. It's just a steady thing that I've observed through the years that kind of bums me out. So there is an element of, oh, I don't know, we might try to move before the kids are in middle school or whatever. So for us, it was like, no, like how about we stay and like help instead of just like buy. Like, but it's not like you can just fix it. But there's an element of like part of it is we need, we need people who are able to help. And so for us, that was like, well, like why leave? Like it's our school district too. It's like we can be a part of the solution. So, which there's not one solution to be clear, but like we can be a part of making it be where we want to be. Like that's partly up to us to help make it what we want it to be. So
is that when you decided you'd be a school board member?
So I got involved with the fair funding thing 4 years ago ish, something like that. Partly just because I started to get more of an understanding of what it was, like what even does it mean? Because we talk about Pottstown being underfunded, and once I understood what it meant, and once I saw how racially biased it is, like it's like crazy how much of a correlation there is between districts that have less white students and districts that are underfunded. It's like infuriating. So I got more involved with that, which got me more involved in just some of those broader aspects of the districts, like paying attention to funding and what what we don't have that other districts might have, and just thinking not just in terms of like my individual school, like our elementary school that we were at, but more like bigger picture. And then at some point I was like, well, I could run for school board. But like that's something that I could do. It's something I thought about doing many years ago when I was more like fresh out of Youth with a Mission and like ideologically minded. Like I thought about politics in this more like, in a way I totally don't think about it anymore. But so then I let that part just kind of, I stopped thinking about that. I stopped worrying about it. Kind of detached from any of those more like ideological ambitions or like that way of thinking that I used to have. And but then when I came around again, I was like, oh, actually, like I think maybe I would like to be on the school board. Like I think that might fit my personality and my gifts and talents, and so then I was like, okay, like then it made sense. So now I'm really glad I did it. It's funny because I used to think about it without having a clue what it meant. Like when I thought about it before, I had no idea what that even meant. It was more just the idea of getting into, I don't know if I thought of it as politics, but like, what the kind, well, and in the most, like,
I know.
Do you remember the Seven Mountains?
No.
Like it was like this whole idea of like within evangelical Christianity, and especially charismatic Christianity, this idea of taking back the culture. Yes. Okay. So in YWAM, they would talk about yes, I did see the big eye roll. they would talk about how like you got these different parts of culture. You've got the family, you've got education, you've got so government, the media, something. It was a very dominion. It was very. It had a very dominionist context to it. It could be applied in some more positive ways and less controlling ways. But having that as my background, it was an element of like the Christians are going to take back the culture, and so I would never have said it that exact way before, but that was more of my mental mind frame when I was in when I was in my early 20s and first thinking about the idea of ever going into any kind of politics.
Yeah.
And that's so like I almost had to go through a full like transformation personally before. Do you want more coffee?
No, I'm good.
Before like the whole idea of like running for school board, like I wouldn't. It was completely off my radar for like 10 years or something like that. Maybe not quite 10 years, but where it's just funny to think like, oh yeah, I actually thought about doing this a long time ago, but I had no clue what it meant.
Yeah.
Like it literally, like it just was this idea.
No, I totally know what you're talking about. Yeah. So then you decided to run, and then was it difficult to run for? No.
Actually, running wasn't difficult. I had to get signatures. I didn't really campaign. I partly in some districts the races are super competitive. Like there'll be lots of people running, especially this last election. There'll be lots of people running for a few positions. When I ran, there may have been 6 people running, or maybe 5 people running for 4 positions, or maybe 7 people running for 5. It was like not very competitive, and I didn't really campaign. Partly because I was busy with the fair funding, and I had an element of like, if I don't get it because I'm busy doing other stuff, that's fine. Like I kind of didn't care that much.
Yeah.
And so actually running wasn't difficult.
So how did you get started in elections?
You mean working like the
Yeah, like
as a judge? Yeah, as a judge of election. Or
you were a judge of election?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. I started that 2008 presidential election when Obama ran the first time.
Really?
It was my first year working at the polls.
At the polls.
And at that point, I was an inspector of election. Like that's what I did most of the years I did it. I knew the judge of election, and she needed helpers, and I thought politics was interesting, and said sure, why not? And actually, that in some ways was like I think really healthy for me because when you work in a polling place, you're not supposed to talk about politics. There's like there's an element of like this place is so we can facilitate the election, not so we can debate it or root for this candidate. Like there's an element, and they're supposed to be inside polling places of like it's like sacrosanct. Like you don't like it's supposed to be very nonpartisan, non-political, which I ended up really liking, even though I had an element of me that was more like partisan or more whatever, interested in the debate. That was like, oh, this is just cool. Like the foundational aspect of like making democracy happen. I was like, I like this a lot. So I've been doing that since 2008 with there's like a few different elections that I couldn't work when I was on the ballot for school board. I couldn't run. I couldn't.
Yeah, I was wondering that.
There was another time one of the kids was sick or whatever. I've missed a few, but overall, like that's a lot. I'm thinking like for 13 years. 13 years I've done it, so that's like 26 elections. But it's not probably fully 26, but at least 20.
So how did you then the person who was judge of election?
The person who was judge of election, they left. I mean, they had been doing it years. They were done, and so and then COVID hit. The first time I was judge of election was spring 2020.
Yeah.
So in the middle of the pandemic, that was definitely crazy. Even though some of the others were bigger elections. I mean, it was the primary for the presidential. It was pretty darn big. So that was crazy.
So what does it entail being the judge of elections?
It entails knowing the process as a whole. I think like that's an important part of it. You deal with a lot of the problems. Like you make sure you have the supplies, you make sure everything's squared away, like you kind of oversee your site and make sure everything's, set up, functioning. Different judges will be more or less involved in each individual process, like setting up the voting machine or whatever. Like I try to delegate some of that whenever I can. but you're just making sure that everybody can vote who's supposed to vote. And if there's a question, like maybe a certain person's name doesn't show up in the poll book, like a lot of times the issues come over to the judge, so the judge can like make the phone calls and look it up and whatever. So you're
Right.
basically the organizer and the
Yeah.
leader for that location.
Yeah, just managing.
Hmm.
What are the pitfalls and joys of being involved in the community the way you are?
The pitfalls and the joys. So I'll go with pitfalls first. There's an element of there's always more to do, and I think part of that's being involved. Part of that's a function of being involved. Like I'm always aware of more things I could be working on, or more problems, or things I could or should attend, or people I should connect with. Um, and because of my personality being what it is, like I want to do all the things. Like I'm not. Somebody wants to like get it all done. And so there's an element of it being hard to turn it off or rest. Like I could work constantly, but I don't have to. It's not like it's necessarily things there's a vagueness. Like I don't have to show up at every event. Like I don't, not even close. But there's an element to me of like, there's always more I could be doing. So, yeah, yeah, and I think that's largely a function of personality. But that is at the same time that can be a strength in that I get a lot done because I feel driven to get a lot done. But and the joys, I mean, I just feel like the more involved I've gotten, it increases the enjoyment just because you know more people and you have being more invested brings joy itself. It also brings when things are going bad, I feel like there's a lot of ownership. In either direction, I feel a lot of ownership of what's going on. So like there's this phrase that people like to throw around, not my circus, not my monkeys.
Yes.
So I feel like, at least as it pertains to school, that's never a thing that I feel ever. I mean, that doesn't mean I'm directly responsible for everything. And that's very clear to me. I know I'm not like needing. No,
yeah.
It's like there's a clear division, and yet because I feel heavily invested, I feel responsible for what's going on, even when it's not my job to manage it.
Yeah.
So that can be great because I feel a lot of pride in all the things that are positive.
Yeah.
And it can also be draining when it feels like I'll just lay awake in bed at night sometimes, especially when I'm aware of particular problems or like particular stress that people are under, and I'm like, I feel a sense of responsibility.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't mean that in the most negative way. I feel like as a school board member, I feel like I should feel that. Like I want people who feel a sense of like responsibility who I elect. Like I don't want people feeling detached. So it's like, to me it's like it's good, but it's weighty.
Yeah.
So
is that the mix?
It is because right. And I like I wouldn't want to not do it. I don't regret doing it. It's just and I knew when I ran, I knew it would be lots of work and that sort of thing. And it's the same with the fair funding. Like I just am super invested in it. So it's like you feel when potential. Like last spring, there was potential for some huge stuff to happen. It was a long shot, but I had hope that we could make some significant progress. And when we didn't, like we made a little bit of progress, like way less than what I was aiming for. When we didn't, it was like, super disappointing. And yet, I don't know, kind of like I knew to expect the ups and downs. So it's not like I'm devastated. It was more just like I'm riding that roller coaster.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. What are some of the surprising strong ties you made in your community?
Surprising strong ties. You're thinking with individual people? Like, is that kind of what you're just anything?
Anything. It could be people. It could be, did you make surprising strong ties with businesses, with organizations?
One interesting tie. So with the advocacy work, there's been a lot of effort to, in our town in particular, to try to get different organizations like let's advocate together. So I think one of the, I don't know, I guess surprising. I think in a lot of towns, different groups operate in silos. Like, well, you got these people working, like the church people might be working on this, and man, you might even have different church silos or and different nonprofits who are working on things, and they're not connecting to each other super well. So one of the pleasant surprises has been being able to bring a lot of those groups together at times to work on stuff. So like last spring we had a fair funding rally locally, and like we had people involved from various churches, the YWCA, the NAACP, the school district, and I think there were more that I'm not even thinking of. But like being able to bring people around a single issue, that's like one of the real positives of the fair funding thing is it's such a common issue, and it's not,
Yeah.
it's an external one. It's like, you know, Harrisburg shortchanges us $13 million a year. There are very few people who are going to oppose us trying to fix that. There might be people who are like, yeah, whatever, spend your time on other things. But there's a lot of people who are like, 13 million? Are you serious? Like, how do we come together to fight that? And so, or fight for what we're supposed to be getting. And so that has been a positive. And when at one point we did a clergy letter, like a letter from all the local clergy about fair funding that we had delivered to Harrisburg. It was like 70 signatures or something like that, or it was dozens of signatures. And we got them from all types of different faith communities of Pottstown, all signing on to the same letter, which itself to me was like, that's awesome. I will take any alignment between churches and congregations that I can get. So that's positive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you? This would be funny to hear your answer. Do you think your Facebook presence affects your place in the community?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm I mean I don't have a it's hard to clearly define how it affects because I was on Facebook using it the way that I am now for a long time before I got super involved in Pottstown. Like I was already a Facebook user big time from early on, and like it's part of how it's almost it feels inseparable from my other communication at this point because that's how a lot of people know me or how they see more of my thoughts. And it's sometimes how I even related to things that are very specifically school board and advocacy, I use it. But just in general, people are going to get a sense of me from Facebook. And I know a lot of people, and especially people who are have some sort of like public or like local government presence or beyond, they're very very guarded with how they use Facebook or try very hard just to not to keep distance because they don't want to cause problems, which is a very real possibility and is something I think about more now than I used to. But to me there's an element of like trying to use Facebook in a positive way while also not being stupid because I mean I don't it doesn't just affect me. Like if I say something inflammatory, it could like cause problems broader than just me having to deal with it. So I'm aware of that, but there's still an element to me of like communicating with Facebook is partly how I've done it for a long time, and it's partly how people. It's how I've used even the advocacy stuff. Like I've used social media massively with advocacy, so it's like it's wound into who I am, and so it's bound to affect my engagement with the community more broadly.
Yeah.
It's like almost like a second language.
Yes.
Like that's what it feels like.
Yeah.
So.
I can definitely see that on there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm always I'm somewhat sheepish about it sometimes because I know that for a lot of people there's an element of like Facebook's, you know, well, Facebook has all kinds of problems for real, but there's an element of like it's more a problem than it's worth, or oh, everybody should just stay off Facebook, or you know, and I don't just mean everybody, but like certainly from the the school board side, especially, there's an element of like be careful, or other people who are leaders in different respects, like trying to separate their online life from their professional life. And I'm like, I don't know how I would ever do that. It hasn't evolved that way. And so it's like, that's water under the bridge. I'm not going to get more, I'm not going to suddenly get real guarded.
Well, it's frustrating too when you are trying to vote for like a school board member and they don't have a presence. So I'm like, I don't know
Yeah.
who you are.
Yeah. and I've used that in other contexts with elections and with other things, like even internally. School board members are part of PSBA, with Pennsylvania School Board Association, and we vote for who's going to be the next president of PSBA, and who.
Oh, okay.
And I was because I'm the PSBA liaison for our board. I was going to give a recommendation for who we should vote for. I went to social media, like and just Googling people in general. But I'm like, if I go on social media, I might get a sense of the things you think and believe and your priorities. And I did find stuff, not anything that was like, oh, this is like, it's like, nothing that was scandalous, but it was like enough for me to be like, oh yeah, I definitely prefer this person because I can tell they value the things that, or I at least I shouldn't say I can tell. It gives me a better picture of what they value than just reading the bio they put up for people to vote on. It was like, I love it. I like being able to see that.
Yeah, I always try to do that when
I'm like, and I'm kind of apologetic about it, like unapologetic about it, because it's like what you put on, it should give us a window, which then obviously it can come right back on me, like being aware of like, I mean, I've had how many, so many thousands of posts. It's totally conceivable somebody will find something and be like, oh, like,
Yeah.
well, we don't like that, maybe, probably.
It depends on what you say about it.
Right.
How is the current political climate affecting you in this community?
Oh, wow. So, Pottstown is fairly, how do I say this? Okay. The current political climate has really been very focused on education, like just this last election. So you've got people who are up in arms about what they perceive as CRT, which is its own. What people are really upset about is the idea that many people don't want anything involved with race to be taught in schools because it might paint America in a bad light, and there's really lots of like manufactured outrage around that. But like it's the broader theme of like racial tension in the U.S. and how it's approached in schools. So that's a whole thing. That's one element. Then you've got the school closures and you've got masks and all of that. Because Pottstown, we're like a 5.5 square mile borough. We definitely lean Democratic. It's not like a purple district where you might have like a lot of people who are like more like seriously right wing and more like progressive. There's not this partisan thing. It's just
not Boyertown.
Not right. Although, right. I'll just leave it at that. It's not Boyertown. We do not have a strong right wing element who have been showing up at board meetings, protesting what they perceive as critical race theory. And we don't have what I would consider more like, we don't have the activist kind of left either. There's not a strong partisan vibe on our board. Like most of the people on our board aren't partisans anyway. They're people who are like community minded, people who, and you don't even have to be a Democrat to win. You can run on both sides of the bat. Like the way the school boards work in Pennsylvania anyway. Yeah. It's not like, it's just not set up to be very partisan unless you make it that way. And nobody in our town has really made it that way. There's definitely, there's people who will complain about this or that. And certainly like with school closures, there's plenty of people who are like, let's get back to school already. Like that definitely, was understood. By the time this election rolled around, we've been in school in session anyway. It wasn't like a pressing like thing. Like most schools have been back in session full time this year. So it feels like it affects us in that bigger picture. Like I've had people ask, oh, does Pottstown teach critical race theory? And like, so I've answered it as best that I can, like starting with asking, well, what do you mean by that? Yeah. We aren't a law school, so I don't think you actually mean critical race theory. But I've had some conversations, but it hasn't been highly dramatic for us. So in some ways, I'm glad for that, because I know a lot of other boards have had a lot of parents showing up, like either outraged about CRT or something like that, or the masks. And
Yeah.
we didn't have a lot of, like, we decided we were going to do masks before the governor said we had to.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And, at some point when things are hopefully better and we're past kids be able to be vaccinated, and at some point we'll shift back to not doing it. I don't know exactly when that will be, but there's not a lot of like angst.
And what was the pushback during the closures?
The
Was there a
closures?
lot of like angry
Yeah,
towards
well,
you
the
or
biggest
just
pushback was because at the beginning of the closures, we weren't allowing extracurriculars either or co-curriculars
oh,
either. Um, because we were like, if it's not safe enough to have them in school, then shouldn't we also be pausing in person, football? And that was where the most energy was around sports, particularly sports, and definitely a little bit with the other co-curriculars, but sports always gets some extra energy. And there's been some people who are like, the kids need to get back to school sooner. And there was a window in there where we delayed it a little longer bringing them back. And so there was a little bit of angst around that. And some more personal conversations. Like, there's a lot of parents who are like, look, I get it. You guys are trying to do your best. Like, my kids are really struggling. They need to be in school. Like, a lot of very legitimate, tough conversations. And I say legitimate because it's like anybody who's paying attention can see
yeah.
there was no, well, anybody who's paying attention can see why it was such a tough choice, even if you disagreed with the choice that was made.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No,
like,
yeah.
it was like, no, this is the choice is between bad and worse, and it's trying to figure out which one's bad and which one's worse. And so most parents, even if they disagreed and wished we'd send them back sooner, had a sense of like, I get it, but. And so it wasn't angsty. It was more just, this is really, really tough.
Yeah.
Like, full stop.
Yeah.
So
How does this lifestyle of you're like an election judge, you're a school board member, like you're definitely involved in, you go to a lot of events and everything.
Right.
How is that affecting your mental health, especially in intense climates like this?
that's interesting. It's really hard to tell for me because it didn't just happen overnight. It's like kind of evolved over time. Honestly, I feel like uh, I've always been I mean, I have OCD, so I don't know if you can feel free to use that. Like, so I have OCD already, and that's better managed than it used to be. Um, but in general, stress and OCD can play off of each other. There are times where I'm just like uh, more anxious or more like having a hard time like relaxing because there's just so much on my mind and on my plate. But on the flip side, I like working. Like, I function well when I'm doing something that I feel like is meaningful. So partly it feels like, no, this kind of fits my strengths, and yeah, it can add some stress, sure, but if I wasn't doing it, I would probably be stressed out about other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so it gives my very active mind tracks to run on. And so there's positives to it. So it's just like that's I guess that's how the job, like, that's how the lifestyle affects it. I don't know if the whole the climate of intensity, it's so hard, man. Go back to like 2016, so that added like another layer, like having like the whole Trump thing. That added another layer for me of like relational stress and I don't know, like a shift in how I saw people, the church, choices. That added like another element to me of, I don't know if stress is the word, but like
Angst?
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, I feel like I mean, I'm naturally kind of angsty. Like, that's kind of my natural state anyway. But it like definitely added some like substance to be like focused on, or like it gave like a clarity to me of, for me, what I saw as something that was really troubling about the world, and something I could potentially, that I had influence over, whether it was from voting or from activism or whatever. There was an element of like that. I don't know. It added a level of like, okay, like in terms of things to focus on, it was such an obvious one. And it probably pushed me more in the direction of wanting to do something with it.
Yeah.
So it very well nudged me in the direction of activism, not in direct response to the national level stuff that was going on, but like it felt to me like suddenly there was more wrong with the world. And so that probably pushed me in a way towards anything I could do that was substantial.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, yeah.
Like it's all tied together though.
But and so like in a way, as far as your mental health, this is actually helpful.
I think so. I think
So.
so.
Detriment,
I don't.
it's
Right. It is added. I mean, in a way, it's added stress, but I don't feel like my mental health has declined because of the the work that I do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so hard to ever,
Yeah,
for sure, right? Like, so I've gone through phases with on the mental health side. I'll be better or worse at different times. To some degree, the OCD feels a little detached from everything else. Like stress level broadly and angst about all that's wrong with the world or whatever, that those go with what's going on. Like, but the OCD stuff can feel a little separate. It's not totally though. I know things interplay, but yeah, no, I feel like to me, being able to fight for what I care about takes away what I think for a lot of people look at what's wrong in the world and they feel maybe a little bit like, what can I do? Like it feels like um, when you don't have a way to work on the problem, you can feel more hopeless or just get apathetic or defeated. You feel more defeated. As long as you can keep fighting, you feel like, well, there's hope for change. So as long as people have hope, then I feel like that helps. And working on it, I mean, I work on it because I have hope, and I have hope because I work on it. Those two kind of go together. So that is like a positive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How does this affect you as a mom and a wife? Which, as a woman, is always a million times.
Yeah. Well, so I feel very lucky to be able to do the stuff I'm doing. Again, it's all mixed up together.
Which makes it interesting.
It does.
Because your life is so, and this is one reason why I asked that question, is because what you're doing is intertwined with what your kids are.
Right. Like I'm going to go to the middle school in 20 minutes where two of my kids are. And that's where I go 4 days a week or so to work from, today I have a meeting first, but like hours. I'm there every day.
What do you do there?
I work in the cafeteria as a volunteer.
Yeah.
So
because they're down.
Yeah, and because again, the middle school is definitely one of our more challenging areas, and I know that there's need where like everywhere there's not enough. There's a labor shortage. So being able to be there, I was already a part of I helped with even getting some of it running mentorship program we have at the middle school.
Okay.
The year before the pandemic, I helped with the administration side and was a mentor. And I was in the cafeteria sometimes. And the idea was that the real idea behind the program was pairing students who needed mentors with adult, positive community adults in various capacities. And so adults would come in and have lunch with a student once a week, or some of our mentors would come in the morning and work with a class. So there was a couple different ways people could get involved. Then the pandemic happened, and it was really hard to do anything with that during the pandemic. And we tried, but it was pretty tough. So now we're back, and in that capacity of mentor volunteer, I'll go in and I'm in the cafeteria just helping with whatever needs help, and sometimes in the halls as well. So I wouldn't probably be anywhere near as conscious of what's going on in the schools if I didn't have kids there. It's just you tend to focus on where you are. And so that's a whole other interesting thing. Like there's a lot of, this is going to be off topic, and I don't know if this will be relevant to anything you're going to say, but like I've seen a lot of people who are like, I want to help Pottstown. I want to, or maybe it's a totally different issue. I want to help in this way. But because it's not where you are, you can only help it's distant. Like maybe you can send money. Maybe you can go volunteer once a week. But even that is tough because if it's not where you are, then it's an extra thing on top of your normal life. And when your normal life is layered onto whatever your mission is, then it's just they go together. It's like I can't separate them. I mean, I could do different things. I wouldn't have to do any given task, but because I'm here and invested, and because it's where we chose to raise our family, it's all together. Like it's just I mean, then I one of my children, she's like a little activist now. Like it's very. I mean, not all of them. The other one of the others is like, I don't really want to go to that rally or go do it. Like she just doesn't care as much. But the one, it kind of fits her personality, and so she's engaged in it too. But it fits, and so she's like involved in the YWCA and like stuff. I'm not. It's not even. I'm not doing it with her. It's more just like, but this is where we are. So yeah, like the YWCA is in our town and in our schools, and so it fits. It just so.
That's cool. So you feel like it has like a very positive. Have they said anything about like
so I mean, not always positive though. Like I've definitely had complaints from my kids, and they would complain about me being on my phone a lot, even if it wasn't all for work. To them, it's all like if to the degree I am distracted by this, or particularly if they feel like they want my attention and I can't give it to them. They probably would feel a similar way no matter what kind of work I was doing on this. But they'll say, you have another meeting? Oh, Mom, I miss when you weren't on the school board and you didn't have so many meetings. And so I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like, I get it. I've had to be intentional about like noticing when or if I'm needing to be more like give them focused attention, because as they've gotten older, it's easier for me, and especially during the pandemic, because they were all here learning. We were all on our computers all day long. It was very easy for me to just be, you guys are fine. Like, let me know if you need anything, but focused on something else. So there's an element as they're getting older of finding that balance of like, wait, you might not seem like you need my attention right now, but do you need attention right now? And so that is probably, that's not just about the kind of work I'm doing. That might just be a phase of parenting plus the technology, but that definitely has been something where it's like, oh, Mom, another meeting? You have another meeting? I'm like, oh, I do. I have another meeting. I'm sorry. So yeah, they mind it. I think they mind it sometimes. They also like that I'm in their schools. They
do like it.
I think I think my middle schoolers, they're always happy to see me, and I'd give it a few years and maybe the Mom, don't come over to my table. We'll see. We'll see. But right now they like it. So I don't know. It's like a mixed bag for sure.
Yeah. How about Luke? Does
So
he have any?
I'd be curious. You should ask him.
I want to. I don't know if I should like call sometime.
Yeah, you can call or let him know. Like, let him know you're doing. I mean, I think he knows you're doing this, but let him know you're doing this and ask the questions. So he's gotten involved too. He actually goes in and volunteers at the middle school on Fridays. And it used to be that he was in the middle school and the high school. There's a CTE, career and tech education that we have, and we have like 12. I think it's about 12 different like pathways kids can choose when they're in high school that are kind of. It's some of the stuff is what you would go to a tech school for. Some of it might not be, but like we have a culinary program and we have a construction program. We have some different, career type training at the high school. So Luke would go into the construction program once a week back pre-pandemic. And so he was just taking off every Friday because he's self-employed and can do that. And so he was volunteering. So he was doing different stuff than me, or some similar, some different. So he also feels very invested. Luke goes to the NAACP meetings, and so he's less politically minded, but still very engaged. So that like aligns, and some of it's very complimentary because it's like I don't go to the same meetings he necessarily goes to. At the same time, I'd be curious to hear what he'd say because it's certainly. Things have changed. I am less of a I'm not very stay at home anymore as a parent. I don't make any money. And not that he ever complains about that, but I think he would probably say he sees it as very much a joint mission. Like we're on the same team working on the same thing, so that's not super important. But it's definitely like I'm less domestic in terms of all the time what I spend my time on than I used to be. So that's shifted. I don't expect to hear him really complain much about that, but there might be a touch of like, yeah. I mean, it's challenging. Like I have meetings 2 nights a week at least.
Yeah.
Which I don't know. Like it's kind of just how our lives have shifted, but it means
So you
more falls
becoming
on
a
him.
school board member, like that really like that changed everybody's
Yeah,
life
I
in
mean,
the
so one of
family.
the meetings I have is a school board meeting once a week, and the other
Yeah.
one is the fair funding. So both things have drawn my attention toward other things. Now, but with the ages my kids are at,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have just been a stay-at-home parent at this point anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, you could, but I would have had I I would have had way too much time on my hands.
School.
Yes, I would have been back in school, totally. So one way or another, I would have been doing something. I'm pretty sure. I know some people don't. I'm too
Yeah.
like I need something. I need a mental outlet
Yeah.
because like I just do. Like even when my kids were little and at home, and I had to be much more. It was like taking care of the kids, taking care of the house, food, like was a huge amount of my time. I was still on Facebook a lot then, and a huge part of the reason was I needed like higher level intellectual engagement.
Yeah.
I had to.
Yeah.
Like I was like it did not suit me to. Some people do great, stay at home parents, little kids. I was like, this is tough. This is not the easy phase for me for sure. So
No, yeah, because like I always had like I could go into work and have
yeah,
conversations with
yeah.
adults.
I did not. I did not have that. Um, so it was pretty important.
Oh, I get that. I
So
totally
yeah.
get that. Do you have any regrets about the choices you've made here, or about anything you've done in the community?
Regrets. No, I don't. Not. I'm trying to think. Like school board, fair funding. There's always going to be stuff I'd go look back and be like, I could have done that better.
Mm.
Like, uh, communicated more effectively, or there's like small like interpersonal like like being on school board itself was an adjustment, just realizing like this changes things. Like I'm a school board member, I'm not just a parent, so I have to there's certain communication that needs to be handled differently because I also have the school board hat on, which can complicate the lives of other people. So some of that early on there were lessons learned. No huge regrets though. Like I like where we live. I'm certainly glad we chose to live here. I wouldn't have probably done anything sooner. Like I wasn't at the spot of being able to be on school board sooner or anything. So no, not any big regrets yet.
Yeah.
Yet. So we'll see. But I've got time. I've got time, and there's always it's easy. It's if anything, it's been easy for me at times to let myself get weighed down by anxiety, or like sometimes those regrets or failures have been more like how much time I spend worrying about something.
Yeah.
Again, not the sense of responsibility with school board or fair funding or anything like that, but more like my own mental health, the OCD, those sorts of things where I'm like, I would have been more effective if I had managed to get like my own struggles under control more. But I mean, even that, it's like I did the best I could. So it's not something I tend to focus on a whole lot. But a lot of those regrets have been more internal. Like, man, I like going way back, way before really the involvement with community stuff. Just wishing I should have gone to therapy sooner. Like I could have helped myself if I had taken these steps. So for me, a lot of that has been more the internal, like.
It's more of a fight then with your OCD,
Right.
rather than any kind of regrets regards about any decisions.
Right. Yeah, I don't think I have any huge. I mean, even during the pandemic, there were certain things that maybe I would have, I would have loved to see us get back into school sooner. But most of that was like it's stuff where it's like we made the best decision with the information we had, and
Yeah.
I mean, hindsight will always be 2020, and there are always going to be things I would tweak. Oh, I should have tried this strategy with fair funding, or maybe this would have gone better, or like things like that. But nothing that I'm like, wow, that took me way off course, or
Yeah.
took us way off course. Like
How much time do you spend with fair funding?
it really varies week to week. At times it's been 35 hours a week, and at times it's probably been 5 hours a week. Maybe five is too little, and it overlaps with school board quite a bit because because there's opportunities to advocate that are because of school board. Me going to a school board type meeting, like it, like PSBA or something. That's school board, but it's also a chance to find out what's going on in the political world with fair funding. It's also a chance for me to talk to other school board members about fair funding. So like those things overlap tremendously. At this point, though, like I I don't know. It would be interesting to track my hours, but I work on school broadly related stuff. Like it's my job.
Yeah.
Yeah, like between volunteering and school board and advocacy, it's
That's more than a full time.
it's more than a full time. Yeah, no, it is. I'm sure if I counted all my hours, it would be.
Yeah.
So, but I don't track hours, so I don't really know for
It's
sure.
better that way.
It'd be interesting to know though.
Yeah.
It would, but I know it has to be. I mean, because it involves multiple evenings and 90% of my days.
Yeah.
So,
That's
but I enjoy it. It's like, it's just a mix. And right now I'm in the schools more, but obviously during the pandemic, I wasn't volunteering in that capacity. So I actually spent a lot more time working on fair funding. So more got done on that level. But I don't sit still well, so it's fine. It's all good.
Do you ever, it's really funny. I was listening to NPR, and they were all things considered. They were talking about Pennsylvania and funding for
Oh,
schools.
were they?
Yeah, they were.
When was this? What
Last night.
was it? Would you know what show? Like Consider This or?
It's all things considered. So that was like around. It's the national.
Yeah.
Thing.
I'm gonna have to pull that up.
Yeah,
That's
and
interesting.
they were talking about Wilkes-Barre.
Yes.
And a parent is suing the state.
Yeah, well, that's part of the there's a
this?
fair funding lawsuit right now because the state underfunds. It's everything you heard. It's not just a parent. They may have been interviewing a parent from Wilkes-Barre, but it's 5 or 6 school districts, the state level NAACP, the state level Pennsylvania Association of Rural and Small Schools.
Yeah.
And then multiple parents.
Like constitutional
Yeah.
so.
So that's starting Friday, and we're going to Harrisburg.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There's a rally,
Okay.
kind of because it's the first day of the suit. There's a rally like around that particular issue. But that is the issue I'm working on. That's just how it's playing out in the courts. But we've also done a lot of advocacy, like directly to lawmakers, to be like, hey, like you fix it. Yeah, they could fix it without a lawsuit.
Yeah.
They just don't want to.
Yeah. They don't want to.
So yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah,
Oh, good. They covered it up.
Yeah. I was like listening. I'm like, oh my god, I'm talking to Lauren.
That's funny. That's so funny.
No, they talk directly about how it affects and how it's not okay.
Do they talk about the racial bias in it?
I had to get gas, so I
crazy.
stepped out before
Crazy.
they. But that's that is a definite. Did you guys pull that? Like, do you put that part of your what you talk about, like making that, and that probably makes it more of a divide, probably.
Yeah, possibly. A lot of people who don't want to fix it, they might have school districts getting more than their fair share of state money. And they look at a lot of the schools that are most underfunded: Harrisburg, Allentown, Norristown, Reading, Pottstown, Upper Darby, York City, Lancaster City, Scranton, Wilkes-Barre. They tend to be more urban type schools.
Yeah.
And they're like, those city schools just waste their money. They don't. So I heard about how before I even was on the school board, it was, I talked to a lawmaker who told me, well, if your school's struggling for money, your school board just must be mismanaging the money. And I was like, No, I mean, like I'm like, dude, I pay attention. And I was already paying attention at that point, and it just was infuriating. And it's because especially because this was a lawmaker whose districts get a lot more than their fair share of the state money, and it's like, oh yes, I'm sure that's the problem. That and so it was.
Oh, I thought that gets under your
Oh
skin.
yeah.